Well, hey there, you beautiful freaks. What's going on this morning? I hope you're all having a great Friday, or whatever day it is that you're listening to this podcast. It's your boy Marty been here to introduce this week's episode. Had the immense pleasure of sitting down with Jeremy Rubin, a Bitcoin core contributor who's been doing a massive amount of work in the Bitcoin space for quite a while now. Most recently, if you freaks have been paying attention, specifically in the last couple days, you'll notice that he officially got a BIP number for his op check template verify BIP. BIP number 119. When we recorded this last week, the number had not been assigned yet. So when we're referring to op CTV, this BIP wasn't created yet. So we talk a lot about BIP 119, which is out there now. We talk about Jeremy's past contributions to the Bitcoin core repository. He's a gentleman who likes to jump around from different areas of the code base, and he's not focused on one area, whether it be the wallet GUI or P2P network or something like that. He likes to jump around, and to me, that's very fascinating. Somebody who is multifaceted and able to contribute to Bitcoin in many ways. So we talked about, again, BIP 119, which just got assigned its number yesterday, I believe. We talked about POWSWAP, POWSWAP, the on-chain hash rate derivatives, and we talked about dev incentives and funding devs and a bunch of other stuff. I think you guys are really going to enjoy this. I'm very, very happy that I was able to get Jeremy in the studio and have a conversation with him about all this stuff. You're going to learn a lot about BIP 119, which is hot in the news today. So very timely episode. This episode of Tales from the Crypt is brought to you by the Cash App. All right, freaks, I hope you saw the new logo. We collabed with the Cash App design team to revamp the brand a little bit. We're going to do that every 6 months. They were really cool, helping us and giving us some resources to be creative. We like creativity here at Tales from the Crypt. And as you know, Cash App is the simplest way to send and save money. It's the simplest way to stack sats, and now it's the simplest way to grow your money. Introducing Cash App Investing. Unlike investing tools that only let you buy entire shares of stock, Cash App's going to let you... Oh, did I say stock? I meant to say stonk. I'm sorry. Cash App's going to let you instantly invest as little or as much as you want into any stonk that you want. If you got a favorite stonk out there and it's just a little too expensive, you can buy as little as $1, all right? You can stack slivers of stonks. Slivers of shares, slivers of stonks, whatever tickles your fancy, all right? And because Cash App is directly connected to your bank account, there are no 4 to 5 day waiting periods, all right? You're going to be able to do that right away. You can start investing today. Brokerage services are provided by Cash App Investing, a subsidiary of Square and member SIPC. And always remember, you don't have to stack stonks if you don't want to. It's just an option. It's there. Stacking sats is still there too, as well. And it's still very easy. And I bet they're going to make it even easier going forward. As always, when you sign up and use the code STACKINGSATS, that's one word, STACKINGSATS, you're going to get $10, and Cash App is going to send $10 to our good friends at Owls Lacrosse. Owls Lacrosse. So download the Cash App from the App Store or the Google Play Store today. Enjoy this episode with Jeremy Rubin. A lot of good things happening in Bitcoin right now, and Jeremy is one of the good things happening. His op check template verify. Enjoy it, freaks. Take care.
Tales from the Crypt.
What is up, freaks? Welcome back to Tales from the Crypt here. Third interview of the week. It's been a big week for us. Very excited for this one. Been very excited for all my interviews this week, but especially excited for this one because this is a man who's been contributing to the Bitcoin core for quite a while now, and I've been watching from afar on Twitter. I've written about a lot of the stuff that he's been working on in the Bent. We've talked about some of it here on the podcast as well. I'd like to introduce you freaks to Jeremy Rubin. Jeremy, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Really glad to be here.
Thanks for coming, man. Again, like I said, I've been watching from afar for years now, it feels like, on Twitter. I feel like I remember the early days of the MIT Digital Currency Initiative, and you helped start that. So I guess let's start there. Like, how did you get into Bitcoin? You've been contributing for quite a while now.
Yeah, I first heard about Bitcoin back in 2011. I was doing an internship while I was in high school and doing what interns sometimes do, which is read Hacker News. I heard about Bitcoin and I was like, oh, that's neat. And then didn't pay too much attention until I got back to school, the next fall, and people were kind of using Bitcoin to buy stuff online. And I was like, oh, that's actually cool. People kind of use this stuff, mined a little bit on my laptop, and then like shut it off because it was running too hot, and then ignored it until after my freshman year of college. I kind of picked up again in 2013, started looking at stuff and going, this is actually cool.
Yeah, I imagine MIT was a very interesting place to be at when people were discovering Bitcoin. It had to be a cool scene.
Yes and no. So I got pretty into it. I was pretty excited. I had a few friends who also thought it was kind of cool. But at the institution level, there really wasn't that excitement. And across campus, a lot of people just kind of ignored it. And so I actually started a project to give all MIT undergrads $100 of Bitcoin.
I remember this.
And so, it wasn't my Bitcoin. It was, with the help of sponsors and stuff. So we did that, and then things got like a little bit more exciting. And then that's where the DCI came in, is we were saying, okay, we've got all these people who are excited and fired up, but then there's no classes and there's no research lab. So the DCI kind of served to be a common focal point for the community to go and, do Bitcoin research.
Yeah, I forget. Thank God you mentioned the airdrop. I forgot about that a little bit. What did we learn from that airdrop? How did the students end up using that?
So there's a few papers that you can go check out from Christian Catalini. He's one of the professors who we roped in to help us understand what happened. We did like a full-fledged, IRB approved study of what went on. Some of the results that we were able to show were kind of about how much people care about privacy, and not that much, but also we were able to show effects around like early adopters and systems that delay early adopters from getting access. Those early adopters who get delayed just never want to adopt. That, sort of like hipsters, if they only want to get in before it's cool, once it's cool, they're not going to get in.
Yeah.
Even if it's a good thing that they otherwise would have been interested in.
Yeah, no, that's the funny thing about Bitcoin. Everybody's like, it's too late, it's too late, it's too late. Are we too late?
Well, depends on what that means. If you're expecting a 1,000x return on, Bitcoin at this point, I'm not a, financial forecaster, but that seems like a little bit aggressive. I think if you're expecting Bitcoin to do something useful for you, it's better than ever. It's more usable, more liquidity on exchanges, things like that, more reliable. So I think that Bitcoin is maturing and growing into itself. So it's not too late to become a Bitcoin user, but maybe it's too late to become a Bitcoin billionaire or something like that.
Yes, I'm very happy you said that, because it does seem like everything is getting more efficient, more robust if you don't pay attention to the price. It's something I try not to do, and on this podcast and the newsletter I write, just focus on the stuff that's being built. And it seems like there's some incredible stuff being built right now. I saw Peter will put something on the mailing list today about like an updated BIP after all the reviews for BIP Taproot and all that.
Yeah, so there's been a lot of progress on various BIPs going on. And at a certain point, when you feel like a BIP is kind of mature enough and it's got enough general acknowledgement, you apply for a number so that the BIP is kind of like, okay, here's like a reference that this is actually, assigned. But then that doesn't mean anything about, if people have actually reviewed it. It's just kind of a signifier that like, hey, people are actually legitimately thinking about adding this to Bitcoin. Like, it's kind of your social responsibility now to actually review this. If you're a company relying on Bitcoin, at that point, you kind of have to look.
And that's the message Peter sent today, or the PR he made today.
Well, I can't speak for him with what message he's sending. When it's still a draft BIP, they're still opening for comments. So It's not like you're saying prepare for this.
Okay.
You're saying like, hey, we really want to get feedback on this because most people have looked at this already. So if you have any qualms or gripes or things that you come up and review that are going to break an application for you, this is a pretty important time to give that feedback, because it's not yet able to activate. We haven't yet merged it into core, but or other implementations, but that might happen, after this period.
And people are pretty excited about it.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so that's another thing you've been working on, scaling Bitcoin, trying to organize conferences and meetings for people to come and talk about how we can scale this technology. So go back a little bit to your days at MIT, how much has it, what was Bitcoin like back then? What were the clunkiest parts?
Yeah, so the original Scaling Bitcoin conference was September 2015 in Montreal, kind of like at the height of the block size wars, or whatever you want to call them, there was a lot of tension. Just getting people into the same room to have a conversation was an achievement in and of itself, because that hadn't really happened before, and we waited kind of too late until the point where people were like really upset. So those days were like pretty high pressure. This past year we had Scaling Bitcoin, I think the 5th or 6th one in Tel Aviv, and it was a pretty nice time. There was a lot of really great work presented. There wasn't really this like controversy or pressure, because I don't think that people were feeling the sort of like we have to act sort of thing. It's like, okay, well, what are the things that are in the pipeline that people are coming up with that we're going to be able to bring to the community? Is like a little bit more of the vibe, I think, these days.
Yeah, I was having a conversation yesterday. It was like we almost needed to go through that tumultuous, quote unquote, fork war or whatever, block size war battle, whatever people want to call it, to sort of realize how one, consensus is made, and two, it probably makes sense to go slow, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's hard to say. I think that there are still sort of like negative consequences that have ramifications today for what the culture looks like, that are sort of scars. Mm-hmm. And it's unclear that those scars are, healthy, but it's at least impressive for somebody looking in to see these scars and to see that Bitcoin can survive that sort of intense community drama.
Yeah. So what do you want to jump into that a little further? What anything particularly, any particular scars that you think?
So generally, I think that I want Bitcoin to be able to support anyone who wants to use it, and to support a wide and diverse sort of set of views and opinions. And I think Bitcoin, for the most part, can support that and can work in a framework where people really disagree. It's sort of like the what's the famous quote that's like, to build a tolerant society, you can't tolerate intolerant people. Mm-hmm. And I forget who says that, but it's sort of a big philosophical debate of if you have to tolerate intolerant people. Mm-hmm. People certainly have that debate right now. It seems kind of important. People argue about the left versus the right, Donald Trump, whatever. But in Bitcoin, the parallel would be, do we tolerate people who don't want to get full community consensus? And what does it mean to have full community consensus? Yeah. And that's something that we talk about all the time. There's mailing list posts of how should we know if enough people have agreed? Who can we ignore? If one person says, hey, I want to keep on doing what I'm doing, should the rest of the network grind to a halt for that person? So I think I tweeted recently a good one that sometimes it feels like you have developers, users, miners, and
Raspberry Pi.
The Raspberry Pi Foundation, because it's sort of this straw man that everybody brings up of like, can I run Bitcoin Core and sync to the network on a Raspberry Pi?
Why is that a straw man?
It's sort of a straw man because Raspberry Pis like get better over time. Mm-hmm. It's just sort of like, what's the minimum hardware cost that you need to run a Bitcoin node? And it sort of begs the question of like, well, like why is this an important thing? You just kind of arbitrarily pick something. I can pick a laptop from like 10 years ago, which is actually my like personal computer. That's what I use. And I can say, I want to be able to run Bitcoin Core on this. I think that there's some value in that. But if somebody shows up with like something even worse than a Raspberry Pi, we don't have a framework for saying like, well, we don't really care. So one of the things that happened recently is no one really uses like a 32-bit build of Bitcoin. Mm-hmm. We don't know any single person who's like actually using this 32-bit build, but we're spending all this developer effort to maintain 32-bit compatibility and to release these binaries. So we stopped releasing the binaries for 32-bit builds because we figure nobody actually needs or uses them. And we're just waiting to see if somebody shows up saying, wait, where's my updated build? I don't have it. I need it for this thing. And it's like, I kind of personally feel like if you have a 32-bit computer and you're trying to run Bitcoin Core, you probably don't even have enough memory. So like you need a lot of RAM to run like a real node. Saying that, I think what you're limited to like 4 gigs of memory on a 32-bit computer, saying that you're going to run Bitcoin Core in under 4 gigs of memory seems like a little bit dicey.
Yeah, it seems, well, I'm not a hardware expert, but it sounds 4 gigabytes of RAM seems a little low.
Yeah, like people's cell phones have more RAM than that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't want to exclude somebody if they want to run in that environment. And there's definitely use cases where it's like, oh, well, actually the reason why we need to run in 4 gigs of RAM is we're launching a satellite and we're using, like 10-fold redundant, memory. Okay, you have error correcting codes and we need, okay, I can understand why you'd want to support that. But still, I think that this 32-bit support type thing, it's not, like, that's not the set of people who I think matter too much. But it's not my job to say. It's just like, if you do actually care that much, then you can maintain the 32-bit stuff. Like, it's not my job to do it.
Yeah, figure it out. And so, yeah, I guess that's an interesting question to ask you, since you've been around the code base for so long. Like, what do you feel responsible to look at or review or comment on?
I don't know. I think that the general philosophy of the project is scratch your own itch. So it's like whatever is bothering me. Mm-hmm. Recently, I've been looking a lot at the mempool. If you're not familiar, the mempool is the data structure in Bitcoin that stores unconfirmed transactions. And it helped miners figure out which transactions are profitable to include in the block. So when you are trying to figure out, like, okay, which block should I mine, you go and consult the mempool, and it tells you things that are generally high fee, and then you include them, and then you start mining on that block. There are a lot of complexities in the mempool that I personally want to kind of fix and make it a little bit simpler, a little bit more performant, and remove some sort of denial of service measures over time if I can, like, fix some of these algorithmic quirks.
And are we segueing into object template verify here?
That could be a segue. I can talk about other modules too. This is just what I've been spending the last couple weeks on in terms of like core module. Okay. But there's other things that are fascinating topics too, and RPC support, and general performance, validation. All these modules are kind of important. I would say the one thing that I don't really look at is like the graphical user interface, because I don't know. It's not been something I've ever really used.
Well, that's why it's crazy that you're working on all these. I'm always fascinated when I find the Bitcoin developers I've spoken to over the years. Some are very focused on one part of the code base, and others like hop around. And the ones that hop around, which seems to be your prerogative, or not prerogative, your modus operandi. It always fascinates me that you can be focused on these different areas and switch mental frameworks to talk about this stuff.
Yeah, there's definitely there's some people who you say like, hey, what's going on in the mempool? Can you help me solve this problem? And they go, oh, I know nothing about that. And you go, well, I thought you've been looking at this project for so long. How do you, how have you only looked at this part? And it's like, well, this is what I'm interested in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's crazy. And so the one thing that I mentioned earlier, op check template verify, formerly known as op secure the bag, is an opcode that you would like to get added to Bitcoin. And the way it's described is, let me try and do this from memory, a covenant template that does one very specific function, or not one very specific function, has a very specific template that executes scripts within Bitcoin transactions in a way that is not possible now. So before we get into op check template verify, specifically, I think we had to go back a little bit in the history of Bitcoin and talk about the opcodes that existed in the past and why Satoshi decided to moonlight a lot of them, to disable a lot of them.
Yeah, so Bitcoin transactions aren't just like 10 standard things that you can do. There's actually an entire programming language inside of every Bitcoin output. And the script that you write determines who can spend the coin. A script is composed of a sequence of operations, and they manipulate some pieces of data that you've passed in and determine if the transaction that you're trying to get approved should be approved and is authorized by that script. There previously were several opcodes that had essentially subtle behavior or bugs. And the combination of subtle behavior or bugs could actually grind the network to a halt and break Bitcoin. So one of them that was disabled early on was this one called opver. People don't talk about this one too much because it's kind of not even desirable to reintroduce. But opver literally asked inside of a script, what version of a client am I running on? So you could imagine that you write a script that says, if I'm running on version A, then it's Alice's coin. And if I'm running on version B, then it's Bob's coin. It's their key and it's their coin. And if you were to write that and then you were to spend on one side of the network with Alice's and on the other side of the network with Bob's, then those transactions would be incompatible. So one would think that it's valid, the other would think it's invalid because you have this commitment to the version. The client version is not a consensus parameter.
And so you'd split the network?
You would split the network.
Okay.
So that one's kind of a no-brainer that like this is a problem. There are others that are like a little bit more subtle of where there lies a problem, and there's not really necessarily a known problem. It just seems like maybe there's a bug. And then there are ones that there is a problem that we know about, like opcat, which people actually really want to reintroduce for various reasons or reintroduce something similar. What opcat does is it takes two pieces of data and it joins them together. So you are taking, like let's say the piece of data that says ABC, the piece of data that says DEF, and then you add it to get one piece of data that says ABC, DEF. The issue with that is that there also happened to be another opcode called opdupe, and that means duplicate. So let's say you had a piece of data ABC, you call opdupe. Now you have a piece of data ABC and another piece of data ABC. So what a crafty programmer could do was call a sequence of opdupe, opcat, opdupe, opcat, opdupe, opcat, and keep on doing that, I think, up to like 200 times in a script. And it turns out, if you start with a single byte and then you double it, you get 2 bytes. You double that, you get 4 bytes, 8 bytes, 16 bytes, 32 bytes, 64 bytes, 128 bytes, 256. And eventually this can grow actually to like requiring an unlimited amount, basically, of RAM on the computer to process this transaction. And that would also like shut down everyone's node if you put a transaction like that on the network.
Yeah, that would it would be a bad denial of service attack.
So it's not the worst. I would, in my personal opinion, I would say that a hard fork is like maybe like worse because this is the network shuts down. So it's a liveness issue rather than a consistency issue. You kind of pick which properties you care about more. I think if the network were to just shut down, you could reboot it and then write a new rule. But if the network were to fork and people couldn't agree on which one was the legitimate one, that would be a bit more of a problem.
I think I agree with you there. It would be terrible if the uptime percentage fell below 99%, but I think that's definitely preferable to a hard fork and confusion. That would cause much more confusion. And going back to like opcat, so I have no idea. I'm just like, so being able to add those two things, those two pieces of data, was that something like two people enter in a covenant and one wins? Like is it like a contract in which two people put money in and one gets all of it?
So no, you would actually just have like a output that you create that doesn't even necessarily have any keys attached to it. It just says like, okay, you have to evaluate this script to see if you can spend it. And then you would put that into a block. They would be validating that block was valid with that output. And then it would like concatenate all this stuff together and make this huge amount of memory, and then your node would crash.
Okay.
So it's not even like a coin that you would be able to spend.
Interesting.
A coin that you'd be able to spend necessarily were there to be a key there that you could reach.
Yeah. So this is, again, opcode scared the shit out of people, at least from what I have observed. They're a bit taboo to approach. So when I saw people reacting to op check template verify very positively, I piqued my interest a lot. Why do you think people are interested in op called CTV now for simplicity?
Yeah. So op CTV is a special type of opcode that is called an op-nop upgrade. So in Bitcoin, there are various operations that don't do anything at all. And there is a paradigm that's been used in the past for check sequence verify or check lock time verify, where what you say is we're a no op, this no operation thing, but now we're going to verify some additional property. But to somebody who doesn't know about this additional check, the actual execution of the program looks the same. And this works as a trick because if a transaction is invalid, you can't include it in a block. And so for the most part, old clients will see these blocks that have things that look like they're not checking as much as they are, but the block is still valid, whereas new clients are enforcing some additional rule.
Interesting.
So part of why check template verify is less scary is because it's using this op-nop verify semantics. And so the result is that you can only ever, unless there's like a fundamental bug, you can only ever reject transactions that previously you would have accepted.
Okay.
So that's why it's a little bit less scary, whereas it's not like you've now created a transaction that will brick the network in some way.
Okay.
People are excited about it, though, not just because it's like, okay, it's not super dangerous, but people are excited about it because of what it lets them do.
Yes, let's talk about how it's going to allow bigger economic users on the network to be more efficient. Congestion control is something that looks very fascinating to me.
Yeah, so right now in Bitcoin, if you wanted to, let's say, do payroll for a company with 10,000 employees, what sort of solutions might you look to, with just what exists today? Well, you can make 10,000 transactions. That's going to cost you quite a lot. And you might get into a weird state where you've paid half your employees and the other half are still waiting for their paycheck, and that's not really quite great. You could do batching, which is where you make a single transaction that has all those outputs, but now you have the kind of problem that, well, now everyone gets paid or no one gets paid. And because it's a big batch with 10,000 outputs, it's kind of likely that nobody gets paid unless you're paying a really, really high amount of fee. Another thing you could look to is like the Lightning Network, but now we're talking about a paycheck. And so we're talking about money that has been like kind of earned and needs to be remitted to somebody in their complete control. And in the Lightning Network context, that would impose that a company trying to pay through the Lightning Network, you have to like have your whole salary collateralized. And so I'm just not sure where that liquidity for that collateral in the Lightning Network would be coming from for things like a paycheck. For things like coffee and you know, a bagel, like I can understand how like these back and forths are going to balance out over time, and you can top them up every now and again using Loop or something like that. But for something like a paycheck, that feels like a little bit different. So this is where check template verify, I think, can help. One thing that you can do is you can take a batch payment that has like 10,000 outputs and you can turn it into a tree of transactions. And then anyone can look at the original first transaction of that tree, kind of like the root transaction, and then they can verify that at some point they can pull out a UTXO for themselves. And what that lets you do is that lets you decongest the network. So if there's a lot of transactions in the mempool and it's high fee, all you need to do is a transaction with a single output, and then everybody can check that they actually got paid. And then at some time later, when fees go down, you can actually pull out your money and get paid.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So it would just... So let's talk about the tree of transactions it creates. They're conditional, right? It's like if the fee market is this what the conditions are? If the if the mempool is.
So there's no condition or logic necessarily baked into this tree. Mm-hmm. The idea would be that when you are ready to spend, all these transactions have either like a minimal or zero fee in them. You do child pays for parent, which means that on your spending transaction, you specify enough fee for the entire part of the tree that you're broadcasting. Mm-hmm. And as the tree is structured, that means that if there's n people, it's only log n amount of data. And so logarithms grow very, very slowly. So it's not that much data. You can do out the, sort of math and numbers, and it's not very large.
Yeah. And so how hard would it, like, what are the processes of these big economic players going to be like if CTV gets implemented and they're able to use it? Like, is there going to be a GUI? We're going to be like,
so
this, and that, or
yeah. Interestingly, kind of a quirk of like how unconfirmed transactions work already. I kind of suspect that a lot of wallets will be able to natively handle OpsCTV without any additional work. It'll just be kind of like not a great user experience because it will show like you have all these things that are unconfirmed that you're depending on for this transaction, and those unconfirmed things look like they're not having any script in them, so they could just be replaced by somebody else. But then if you make a small upgrade to the wallet to say, okay, well, trace through the parents of that unconfirmed transaction, then you'd be able to see, oh, these ones are all OpsCTV, which confirms that your payment is going to make its way through. And so this simple covenant, which says like, yes, pay these 5 people, and then those 5 people expand to pay another 5 transactions and 5 transactions or however many until it gets to your node, that will give your wallet the proof. And so they need a small upgrade to make that work, and then to figure out how to pay fees appropriately. That would make it a relatively good experience. Until that happens, what I would expect is that exchanges would take the burden of responsibility for expanding these trees, and they would use it as sort of opportunistic scheduling, where they would say, we're willing to create all these outputs right now for this fee rate, and for a higher fee rate, we'll defer creating them, but less overall fee. So we'll give you this big transaction that is paying, let's say like $100 in creating all of our 100 outputs, $1 per output, or we'll give you $5 to create one output. And if you're a miner and you're trying to fit in a lot of transactions, the $5 for one output, it might be more appealing unless you run out of things that are, competitive. And then for the ones that are further down in the tree, because you're willing to now wait for these ones a little bit more, maybe you're only going to offer like 10 cents per output. And so your total spend in that case, 10 cents per output for 100 outputs would be $10 plus $5, $15, rather than spending $100 up front. Those aren't exact numbers for what it would be, but there is some evidence that suggests it's about savings like that.
That's pretty massive, if that's what it comes out to be. And so focusing on these congestion control stuff, would the workers within this covenant like sort of say, hey, I'm willing to wait longer, or they have access right away, but they can't move the coins?
Yeah, so every user could know that they have these coins, and if they're willing to pay a high enough fee, they could pull their money out.
Okay, that's what it is. You pay. Okay, so child pays for parent.
Yeah,
and then you can get it out faster. All right.
Yeah. So fundamentally, what OpsCTV is saying is you're fixing all the details of the transaction
on the
so that you know that the outputs that you wanted will get created.
Okay.
And that's the only way that coin can get spent, is to create the outputs that you said that you wanted to create. So it's kind of like if you imagine that you had a pre-signed transaction that you said, okay, I'm going to sign some transaction for my wallet, but I'm not going to broadcast it yet. And well, you can always double spend that, right?
Yeah.
But if you imagine that you had a way to say, but now I can't double spend it because I deleted that key, CTV is equivalent to that, but you don't need a proof that you deleted that key, because you can never prove that you deleted something.
Yeah. No, incredible. I thank you for coming and explaining this to me. I have a much better understanding now.
Yeah, of course. And that's not all that happens with CTV. I think it's something that this is sort of like the base case that kind of like explains the intuition, but you can kind of put this inside of other protocols as well, and then you get benefits there as well, like Lightning and payment pool type things, various other smart contracts. You can make wallet vaults. And it just sort of opens the door, but this is like the sort of base case to understand before the other stuff.
Yeah, let's jump into the wallet vaults. That's something you're saying the Chainco guys are excited about?
Yeah, I mean, I won't speak for them, but I was hanging out in their office this week, and they were saying, why are you talking about all this batching stuff and congestion control? We think vaults are cool. And I go, well, yeah, I mean, I think they're cool too. That's why I've been working on them, but I thought this is like the kind of prime use case, but maybe I'll talk more about vaults now. And so fundamentally a vault is like, I like the idea because it kind of respects one of these phrases of Bitcoin, which is be your own bank, which I take to mean provide yourself real financial services, not just like, oh, no one's going to issue currency. It's like, no, you're going to actually give yourself financial services. You're going to run a Lightning wallet, and you're going to be routing, and you're going to be a payment provider, and you're going to, make your own vaults for like secure deposits and withdrawals and all this sort of stuff. So that's kind of like one of these phrases I really like for Bitcoin. And vaults are something that you can build using CTV, which let you structure sort of like allowances or like annuities, where you say, I've got my Bitcoin in cold storage, and I want to, from cold storage, which I like can't easily get to, withdraw like 1 Bitcoin a month, let's say. And then at any point, if you're like, my cell phone got stolen, which is where I was putting my Bitcoin onto every month and topping up, what do? You can actually stop that withdrawal program, which is kind of cool. So rather than saying, I want to access my cold storage once a year, I'm going to put 12 Bitcoin on my phone. You say, I'm going to access my cold storage 12 times a year. What you say is, I'm going to access my Bitcoin 1 time a year. I'm going to set up a program which moves it onto my phone in 1 month increments. And if I notice that my phone gets stolen, then I will stop that program, and I will send the funds back into my cold storage.
So using CTV, you initiate the transaction, and that has a bunch of other transactions below it that then say, hey, send it at this block. send it at this block, send it at this block.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then vaults, if somebody does get your phone and then they do send a transaction from it, a vault dictates that there's a period with which a period of blocks with which you have to initiate another transaction.
Yeah, you're using relative time locks.
Yes.
So that you say anytime an action is taken, you have a timeout and there's a default action. So before the actual action happens, which is like them getting your funds, you have to make it wait maybe like 10 blocks. And you can sneak in a transaction that sends it back to your cold storage before that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it kind of gives you this. One way of thinking of it is an undoable transaction, which is kind of like, why would you want that? But imagine like undo send in Gmail. Mm-hmm. When you send an email and you're like, oh, I've got a typo, or I accidentally, called my boss a mean name and I should erase that. As we've all maybe done. And then what you could do is you could say, oh, wait, take it back. So like, let's say that you send funds to an address that you're like, I'm not sure if this is the right person. And then they say, hey, that was not the right address. This is not one that we can spend from. You can give yourself a limited amount of time to click, okay, broadcast a transaction that sends it back. Now, you can't guarantee that transaction goes through or claiming it, but that's sort of like the intuition for what this vault mechanism is doing, is it's giving you a pathway of saying, undo this ongoing transfer to my phone, which I think, if you're going to be able to securely access your cold storage and that's not a concern for you, and you don't mind going to, 5 safety deposit boxes and building one of these partially signed Bitcoin transactions at each one, then maybe that's better. But if you kind of want to have like a nice user experience where you're like going once a year,
want to live your life,
and you want to live your life, then you can kind of set this up. And it's actually, I think, it respects like, what are people actually going to do? They're actually just going to have their allowance in its entirety on their phone, but they'd be much better off setting it up as like a structured with their, burn rate. And this applies for like, everyday users. It also applies for exchanges, moving between cold and hot wallet. You can also imagine doing this for inheritance, that you set up for your trust fund kids. Like, hey, I don't want this money to corrupt you. You are inheriting all my Bitcoin, but I'm only going to let you spend 1/10 of a Bitcoin a month. And this is going to make sure that, you've got your rent taken care of. But it's not going to, let you drive around Ferraris on the moon unless Bitcoin goes up a lot.
Yeah, you're not blowing these sats on cocaine and booze, children.
Yeah, hopefully,
we hope not.
Yeah.
We hope it.
So I think that's where it's like kind of cool.
It's very cool,
and that's not something that you can really do today in Bitcoin.
No, and it's like thinking of it. So story time here, freaks. I believe it was like 2014, 2015. I accidentally was being a careless Bitcoin user, and I accidentally pasted an address that I'd used before. I was trying to send a cold storage. I actually wound up sending to an address that belonged to a merchant that I'd used before that. And luckily, the merchant was so kind to send it back. I had to email and be like, hey, I just sent you Bitcoin accidentally. Like,
that sounds like a scam. Like you send them like, hey, I accidentally sent you this Bitcoin and it's still in the mempool, and then you replace by fiat, and then like they sent you different coins back or something like that. Yeah,
well, this got confirmed, so I was asking back for like a confirmed transaction that they had possession of at this point, and luckily they sent it back. But a vault would have been much more preferable than having to rely on the merchant, responding to my email and being kind enough to actually send me back the satoshis.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And so, like, what do you think a timeline for this would be if you had to put one on it?
Well, I'm having a workshop February 1st in San Francisco. So definitely you can find information on that workshop on my Twitter or on utxos.org. So I'm hoping people will come to that and do a lot of review. It's feeling like general, consensus among developers that this is an okay design. There might be some tweaks that need to happen, but for people to be fully happy. But people are evaluating use cases that they're interested in and making sure that this, does the job, and that we're not introducing some other, unintended behaviors. So I think we're getting to the point where, maybe this year we can see it merge and available if miners signal for it activating, if we use version bits as the activation mechanism. I can't, I don't have merge rights on Bitcoin Core, so or any implementation for that matter. So I can't be like, hey, it's out there, But I think that that's where it's sort of a community thing, is that people need to go and look and say, if this is a good change, like they should start vocalizing that, and that's going to drive adoption and sort of integration a little bit faster.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think adding to the difference of Bitcoin development back in the early days when you were at MIT and now, that's what's been very comforting to see, is things like the BIP Taproot review sessions that were going on. I'd never seen something like that around a BIP until Anthony Towns took the reins there. You throwing a workshop for OpsCTV to get people interested in learning about it, and it just seems like things are more organized for this distributed software project these days.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I've been thinking about is like, where is like the like project management, and like what does that mean for Bitcoin? And I think one thing that's unique is it's really just the community. It's like, what does the community want? Where are people's priorities? What's moving the needle for them? And as a result, it's not like there's like a top-down decision on what's getting done. It's just like, what do people care about?
Yeah, no, and it's been beautiful to see everybody come together and just weirdly organized naturally. Again, like as I said, I've been like watching you on Twitter from afar for like years now. It's crazy to meet you in person, and honestly, like this OpsCTV, and we'll definitely talk about POWSWAP. These are pretty freaking crazy things if they get implemented and used by people.
Yeah, I'm a little stretched for time. There's like too much going on. I need to find a way to scale myself a little bit, I guess, before I can scale all these projects.
Yeah. What? How do you search for help on this? Do you have like a team of people that help review or go to?
I wish I had a team of people to help review. Like that's part of why I'm out here at Chaincode, is visiting to get them to take a look at my stuff and kind of pull their ears. And they've been really gracious hosting me. Yeah. The sort of general shape of the ecosystem, I think it's difficult to get no strings funding for doing the work that you want to do. So that's something that I'm actively, exploring. Right now, I've got some research grants from some generous, individuals in the community that are helping me do this. But it doesn't necessarily feel like super sustainable for myself. I am also, sort of saying, okay, well, I'm working by myself on all these things. I've got a lot of great stuff going on. If I could work with other people and have the capital available to pay other people to work on this, that would move this much faster. And it's sort of I think I've been speculating of like, what would Bitcoin look like if default wallets just said, yeah, you pay a tax to a development organization once a year, and you can opt it out if you want to. It's not like a part of the protocol. It's just like, this is the expectation of the community that you should be investing 1%. And it's sort of one of these weird, Nash problems where if everybody else is donating 1%, you don't need to. But if you think about what is 1% of Bitcoin's market cap?
Well, the problem after that is, how do you distribute that 1%?
Distributing is hard. So yeah. I think that, ignoring those challenges, what I'm just saying is like, think about what it would mean for Bitcoin if 1% of the market cap went to development every year. What's 1%? That's $1 billion, right? So we're talking about $1 billion going into, it's probably more. I don't know. What's the market cap right now? I don't follow that stuff.
Right now we're at we got to be around 160 bill, I would say.
Okay, so we're talking about $1 to $2 billion that would just be funding protocol research and development. Like, that maybe is even too aggressive. What if we did 1/10%, right? Okay, now we're talking about like $100 to $200 million just to fund protocol development, and that doesn't really even exist right now. It's just kind of crazy. We're talking about a minuscule amount of burn that people would be having, and if you hold Bitcoin, and let's imagine that we don't have this Nash equilibrium selfishness to worry about, like, how much more valuable do you think Bitcoin would be if we had $200 million a year going into Bitcoin research and development and hiring developers?
I think it's coming, though. Are you not encouraged by like the chain codes of the world, Square Crypto, Digital Garage? It seems like more are popping up, and I think those guys do have to lead, because again, I think the distribution problem is just a whole governance, social scalability headache that's not worth it. But I do think the funding needs to be there, and I think hopefully more people follow and Square and chain codes sticks.
Yeah, so I think that this comes down to the sort of like distribution issue that you're looking at, is that we have a couple organizations, but it's still relatively centralized. And I think that I just want to see a lot more of it. A lot more development foundations, things like that.
Rich Bitcoiners, get on it. Well, that's one thing actually we're trying to do here. We're going to 25% of the sales on some of our merch is going to BTC Pay server. Hopefully, I mean, we're a small, humble little operation now. I would like to contribute more, but no, I do feel that need as somebody who's been in Bitcoin for a while to definitely donate back. And BTC Pay is what we chose recently, but I would love to contribute to a fund helping core developers directly.
Yeah, it's definitely something that I've been thinking of and toying with, like what's my plan, for my future as a developer? How is it going to be something that I keep on doing versus having to turn away to, work on something profitable?
Well, if I will definitely hit the road campaigning for you.
I'll let you know when something's happening.
I can tell you that. And I'm confident people would step up for you too. I think your review of the code and your attention to Bitcoin over the years is unmatched by a lot of people, most people in the world, obviously. And it would probably not be advantageous to lose your attention on the project, I would imagine.
Thanks, I appreciate that.
Yeah. But so that's the funding problem. I think it is getting better. What do you think about the pace of Bitcoin? So we've talked about it's definitely gotten better, it's getting more efficient, but do you think the project's moving too slow, too fast, just right?
It feels like the project can be a little bit fragmented, and it feels like there can be trouble sort of prioritizing on big projects. So Taproot and CTV, these are big features development, but this is maybe more the nitty gritty of improving modules in the code that aren't feature oriented. An example is I was doing some work on the mempool before I came out for this trip that I was trying to get reviewed on this trip, and somebody else opened a new pull request for something else in the mempool. And it was just kind of a refactoring, but it was going to make me have to spend several hours, if it got merged right before I came out, when I was trying to get all this stuff done before so I was like, hey, can you just not merge this before I come out? Because I don't want to spend half a day working on rebasing this because I'm trying to get these things together. And they're like, okay, I'll try not to. But then it got merged. And then it's okay, well, I'm working on this thing, which is actually a major performance improvement for the mempool, which has implications not just in mining, but also during reorgs, during block validation. And now I'm wasting another half day to change the name of some variables. There's sort of can be fragmentation because there's not a project manager who is looking down and saying, what is every person working on? What are their priorities? What are the overall sort of movement of the project? What things do we need to emphasize? Where should we be directing review? It's very much decentralized, scratch your own itch. And I think that that's a virtue. People are always upset. Congress is so slow to pass bills, but that's by design. Mm-hmm. So it's not necessarily bad that Bitcoin is inefficient in this way, but it does impose a very heavy burden on developers who just get frustrated. Everyone I talk to quits for several months at a time and then comes back. They go, I just got so frustrated I couldn't work on it anymore. And that's difficult because how do you support developers when their emotional state is such that most of the developers I know take several month breaks because they're so frustrated that they can't get progress on their things. Not only are you losing those couple months of time, you're losing those developers, and people are not happy. So I think that that's something that I really care to try and fix, but it's hard to figure out how you can do that with respecting Bitcoin's value system.
Yeah, no, I can't imagine how frustrating that must be to work on something for so long and somebody else working on it, not even unbeknownst to you on another side of the planet, merges it and fucks up all the work you just did.
Yeah. I'm not, if you're listening, I'm not angry at you for merging that. I'm glad that it's also this happy thing where yes, things got merged. Yeah. Things getting merged is good, but it's just helps if it doesn't feel like it invalidates what you're trying to do.
Yeah, but are these just necessary growing pains?
Maybe, it'll get better. So
Yeah. Well,
I guess it also limits how quickly it can grow. That's the thing, is that I know some really brilliant developers who came in to try to work on Bitcoin, and they were really excited, and their contributions day one were phenomenal, and they left because they were like, this is just too frustrating. Yeah. So if it's growing pains, maybe, but it's also the type of thing that I think we could be growing more efficiently.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, to limit developer frustration should be a goal, right? Just common sense overall.
Yeah. People are doing great work on this, though. Like, I know Jonathan Newbury is doing a lot of really good work. He just sent out a survey to some contributors, kind of asking, like, what's going on? You were a good contributor. Like, are you happy with how it's felt? Like, what could change? And I think that that's important work to kind of figure out what we can do to improve ourselves. So it's not like people don't care about this. It's just like the state of affairs right now is not, not lots of happy developers.
Yeah. Well, if you're a Bitcoin developer listening out there, thank you for what you do. Thank you for going through all that frustration and that hard work. You were working on something that I believe is extremely worthwhile, not potentially. I think it is one of the most important technologies of our day. So thank you for fighting through that frustration. And if you haven't been able to fight through that frustration, you're sitting on the sidelines now, enjoy your rest. Get that mental rest. But another big another big topic that causes contention, which I was actually happy to see brought up this week too, it's been a big week for development, was activation routes. And this is probably the best softball to start the activation conversation with, is Matt Corallo's big consensus cleanup. And so we touched on this earlier with how do you get things activated? How do you do this right? And I think his proposal for this particular BIP makes sense. It's BIP 9, 95% threshold within a year. If that fails, you go back to 6 months of review, why it failed, and then you do a BIP 8.
Yeah, so I actually
80%.
I've got some opinions here.
Let's hear them.
So if you go in that post or search on YouTube, like Stanford Blockchain Conference 19 or 18 or something, I have a talk called SPORK, and it stands for sort of probably a fork. It's a probabilistic forking mechanism for Bitcoin where you can change the rules only if a block passes an additional proof of work filter. So if you make a valid block that passes proof of work, you'd have to grind for another 6 months of those blocks in order to find one that activates the new rule. This is a weird rule, but what's interesting is it has some properties that you can take a look at that are kind of cool in terms of who has influence when and where and what that means for mining. Now, that mechanism is not ready to roll out, and I'm not advocating for it. But why I think that talk is actually worth watching, and maybe just looking at the slides for everyone, is the analysis that I do of that mechanism is compelling in its favor, and it's really surprising. This is why I recommend that you watch the talk, is if you just look at the slides, you're not going to get the nuance of how weird it is. But if you imagine, if I'm a miner and I'm going to see a small decrease in revenue after a change, for some reason, I'm going to see a small decrease in revenue. This is actually the case where I would be opposed to this change, right? If the fork activates sooner, I'm actually less opposed than if it activates later. So if I can delay a fork for up to 3 years, if you think about it, I'm going to delay it for as long as I can. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of the intuition. If it activates sooner, it's actually a Band-Aid ripped and it's not as bad. And so there can kind of be these counterintuitive, facets of miner behavior where, decreasing miner profitability is bad, but also it's bad if we can't get protocol changes through. And what we're doing is we're essentially, with the current structure that's kind of being proposed, we are allowing miners to be sort of personally selfish at cost to the entire ecosystem. And you can model basically, and I do this in Spork, and those sort of protocol models can be adapted to other activation mechanisms. It actually ends up kind of being better for everyone if things just get activated and go through. That other miners may become even more profitable. And if you think about what's good for the Bitcoin ecosystem health, having more miners become more profitable is actually good, even if maybe one miner gets slightly disadvantaged. Now, there's sort of an issue around like, how do we pick winners and losers? We don't want to do that, but that's where in this model that I came up with, which is there are opportunities to reject forks if they're seen as like obtrusive among the miners. And miners generally would reject something that seems to be unfairly picking winners and losers. If it's just like kind of a virtue of like, yeah, this is a protocol change that we need to do to fix a bug, but for some miners, it disadvantages them. And we know of things that are like this, like the time warp bug. Miners can exploit time warp bugs to make more profit, but no miner is doing it because it's bad for the ecosystem. If somebody were to be doing it, would we really delay activation of that soft fork so that they can continue making money off of a bug? No, we would make the change and we'd rip the Band-Aid and get it done. And so I think that that's where modeling some of these things and actually thinking about what revenue are we protecting and which revenues do miners actually care about is kind of a worthwhile exercise.
Yeah. How much of it depends on the nuance of the particular merge, right? Like, so with the big consensus cleanup, Matt seems to think that it's just taking away stuff. It's not really contentious, right? So the miners have no reason to delay it.
Taking away stuff is more contentious.
Yeah.
So I don't remember the exact rules, but there were a couple of rules that I'm not super happy with.
Yeah, there's one thing where there's an address structure that may become unspendable or something like that, or
with like code separators or things like that. It's one of these things where like we don't really know, but those things could be inside of P2SHs that haven't been revealed, and maybe somebody has some buggy wallet that they wrote. Maybe even Satoshi's coins are in, I don't think they are, but it's one of these things where I'm just kind of uncomfortable with setting that precedent that we're like, hey, people don't really seem to be using SegWit v0 anymore. Let's just disable it. It's like, well, what if your funds are still there?
Yeah. And
that's a very more aggressive example because this code separator thing people aren't really ever using. But I think that it's just like I don't like the precedent that much. And I also I think that there's this trade-off that Matt's making, which is we know that we want to do all these things kind of, so why don't we just do them all at once? And then there's the flip side of like, let people pick and choose which things that they want independently. Don't make things that don't need to be correlated, right? So like fixing the time warp attack has nothing to do with fixing the code separator stuff. Those are two independent things. So why are we telling the community that they have to come at the same time? I would like to see, I think, most of the consensus cleanup happen. And I think that it really is a cleanup. Like it's not, like you said, it's taking stuff away, but taking stuff away, like that can, like the endowment effect? So if I were to ask you if you wanted to buy my pen, how much would you buy it for?
As low as possible.
Yeah, let's say it's a Bic pen, and I'm like, hey, you want to buy my pen?
50 cents.
50 cents, okay. So now somebody walks through the room and gives you a pen, a Bic pen, and I say, hey, can I buy that pen from you? How much does it cost?
At least 50 cents.
Well, no, I mean, like what people.
Oh, well, no, I have a pen.
You have a pen.
I already have a pen.
And it's your pen, and I'm like, I want that pen.
Give me a quarter.
A quarter, okay. Well, you're just a nice guy. But what the literature shows is that generally, like, once people have something, they really don't want to give it away, even if when they are asked if they want to purchase it, they don't think it's worth anything. Yeah. So they've done, the psychologists and economists have done this experiment that things are kind of sticky. Like people just like the one that they have, even if conceivably they could buy another one or they wouldn't personally pay that much for it. But now that they have it,
it's an emotional attachment.
Yeah, and it's one of these small almost irrationalities that people look at, and I think that's where these sort of things come from. Of you're taking away this thing that I used to be able to maybe do something with at one point if I came up with something clever enough.
Yeah, it was like ASIC boost, right? Or covert ASIC boost. That was.
Yeah. We're going to take away ASIC boost, but I have it.
Yeah.
And we haven't yet maybe deployed it that widely, but we were going to make more money, and you can't really take it away if we have it.
Yeah. Interesting. No, these are fascinating conversations. I'm glad we're being critical of this stuff.
Yeah. So we'll see. I mean, I hope it goes through.
Yeah. No, but I was, again, like, just back to the point of why I brought that, like the activation method, right? Like it's, again, is it nuanced depending on the merge? So like would the BIP for op CTV getting merged, would you,
So
you just explained the activation method you'd like the spork in the future, but.
yeah, so my general feeling, and it's not my activation, I can't really do anything about. I can propose, like if I had my, like if I were the, semi-dictator for Bitcoin, I would say, yeah, CTV is going to be a spork because I think this has better properties for Bitcoin. But that's not what everybody else has agreed to and kind of likes right now. Right now, the standard is version bits, and that's sort of the expectation. So I would propose something that fits within most people's expectations. Matt's suggestions on how we might change this, I think might apply to like maybe the next batch of soft forks, because I don't know if we're going to get community consensus that this sort of set of parameters around a version bits activation are what we actually want. Because it's kind of controversial, like, oh, we're triggering like a flag day at some period after, like, is that actually what we want? That's going to require a lot more conversation to get to that point. And it's almost one of these things that we can walk down that road if we ever have a soft fork that fails. But maybe it's good if we prepare ahead of time too.
No, I agree. And that's why I liked the 6-month discussion period, where after which you can be like, all right, maybe it's not a good idea.
I think what's nice in particular about what Matt said is that people don't know like what the process is. They're like, hey, our soft fork failed. Let's start it again right now. It's like, okay, no, if it just failed, give it 6 months and then try again. And I think what's nice is that it's just an answer. The answer could be, yeah, start it immediately again, but start it with a like twice as long timeout period. Mm-hmm. That's also maybe a reasonable policy, because if you're going to have this discussion period, you can say, unless miners actually just like messed up and are ready to go, like allow for a flexible amount of discussion. Mm-hmm. So you could have any of these things, but
yeah, no, it's there is no direct way to do it.
Yep.
Which I'm fascinated to see if BipTat, if and when it gets a number, how people present that should be activated. And,
yeah, I mean, you could also imagine another form of version bits, which has 3 states. One would be continue discussion. The other would be activate, and the last one would be fail.
Interesting.
Right now, you only have one bit, and it's either reject or accept, and that doesn't really capture the full spirit of like, if I'm not I can signal that I'm not opposed, which is a very different thing than I'm ready.
Yeah. So for any of you freaks that are listening that are completely lost about what we're talking about right now, when the version bits that we're talking about, miners can signal it's a binary. Right now it's binary. You accept or you deny. And to signal that they're ready for an upgrade or a particular bit, they will flip the version bit one way or the other to signal to the rest of the market that they're ready or not. Just a little version bit lesson there that you probably should have given, but I tried to hop in there.
Sorry about that.
Yeah. No. I mean,
you did great. That's
I'm not putting the
basically
pressure on you.
So one of the key parts though is that you set a start time and an end time for collecting enough signals that people are ready for it. And I guess what I'm kind of saying is like, why have an end time if people have signaled this middle unstable state, which is let's keep on waiting to see if we get above this threshold. That would be kind of like a flexible end time, which might have some better properties for saying, we're not sure yet. We want to keep discussion going. It might also be worse. As I said, like, if you're a miner and it's going to be less revenue, you just want to keep discussion going for a long time. You can
filibuster, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, while we're on miners, we could talk about fucking everything right now. But let's talk about POWSWAP. This is fascinating. Yeah. On-chain hash rate derivatives. I'll let you explain. I'm not even going to try and...
So I came up with a primitive, which I call a block delta contract. And a block delta contract, essentially, you are observing the number of blocks that got produced in a given period. And if it is above your expectation, Alice gets some money. If it's below your expectation, Bob gets some money. That's the basic building block. There's a lot of like more nuanced versions that you can get into. But using that, you can imagine saying, over the next 6 months, if I see 100 blocks less than I was expecting, that means that we lost about like a day of hash rate over that period. So I will have a contract which pays out based on that. The thing that's tricky is Poisson processes are pretty volatile. So you have to think about these parameters kind of closely of like how much variance does there exist naturally. But that sort of variance, if you're trading over, the sort of gambler's dilemma, can you trade long enough to not go out of business? If you trade long enough, they'll average out to the actual thing that happened. So these can be used by various parties to either, leverage or hedge or do other sort of fundamental market operations.
And so how are these constructed on chain? Is it a certain opcode,
It's not a certain opcode. It is a transaction, set of transactions that observes both the block height and the time. And so by observing both block height and time, you're able to check the discrepancy essentially and decide one way or the other. We can go into like the scripts, but I think without like a picture and whiteboard, it's a little bit hard to write out, but it works. And there's a few different ways of doing it. So
it's using obviously the chain as an oracle with the block height, and then Unix as an oracle for the time, Unix time.
Kind of. So you have the check lock time verify opcode, which checks the timestamp, which is kind of a Unix timestamp, but it's not like a local Unix timestamp. It's the global one of
implemented by the network.
Yes, and so maybe this introduces an incentive to like try and shift that clock, but the network would have problems if that drifts too far from like what the actual time is. Like it's generally intended that should be roughly what people know the time to be. And you'd have like problems like in difficulty adjustments and other things if people mess with that too much. So you're able to observe both that and the number of blocks that passed from when you started the contract.
Yeah, fascinating. And then we were, and could this be implemented today? Yeah,
there's no changes. It can be done today. I actually wrote code that does it.
Yeah, you have a beta open?
No. This is a difficult project to get off the ground. If someone is really interested in it and is like, this is awesome, it probably needs like an upfront 100K of legal expenses to go, which I don't have. So if somebody wants to like help get this off the ground, it's definitely something that I think is interesting. But I think absent having that, that seed sort of push on something that it's just like has to be released into the open, which is like these contracts and this big legal expense to kind of like validate that this is an okay thing to release. It's a little bit hard for me to get traction on.
Hey, rich Bitcoiners, listen up. Is this the first podcast you've ever been on?
No, I've been on a couple.
Yeah.
This is a great one, and this is the special thing between us. But there are other podcasts that I've.
No, because I was trying to do as much research as possible. I didn't come as many podcasts. Came in more blog posts and tweets and pull requests.
Yeah, I've done a couple, but I guess I haven't done as many that are like industry podcasts. Like I've been on one or two that are maybe more broad.
Yeah. No, do the industry rounds, man. More people should be hearing your thoughts.
Thank you.
I'm flattered to have you in, and that's back to the derivatives, the difficulty-free derivatives. We were having this discussion before we hit record, and it's one thing I've been thinking about a lot is why would you ever short difficulty outside of a hedge against a big purchase of miners that haven't been released to the market yet? And you made a very good point. You don't even have to short difficulty, really. You can just short the pace of difficulty growth or hash rate growth.
Yeah, so I think that's the thing, is that who's taking these trades? Like, who wants these contracts? That's sort of an open question. I do fundamentally believe it's like a two-sided market, because miners with different risks will want to hedge both ways, and miners who are very confident may want to leverage their positions. So you do kind of have this, both sided, but you have to keep in mind that like the default thing that happens in the network economically is that hash rate increases. So no one's actually trading hash rate goes down. They're just trading hash rate doesn't go up as much as you expected it to, or it goes down a little bit. You could also write contracts for systematic collapse, but that's like a little bit harder to do because if you have a systematic collapse in hash rate, you're not even going to have blocks to put your transactions in. So,
yeah. How do you claim that?
Yeah, it's a little hard to claim. So it doesn't work as well when there's sort of like unlimited downside, and that makes sense because, or unlimited downward movement in hash rate, because you just won't have blocks. So that's sort of outside the model of when you would use these. But as a non-mining user, there are also reasons that you might want to take these positions. One thing you might say is, I want to get paid out if hash rate collapses, and I'm going to need a lot of Bitcoin if that happens. So you make a bet that says hash rate goes down to 10% of what it is. Would that ever happen? I don't know. But how much Bitcoin would you want to have if that went down? Because Bitcoin's not going to be worth as much. So if you want to have savings in Bitcoin, what this does is it turns Bitcoin for you into kind of a stable coin, where a stable coin, I don't know if there's a banned word for here, but
no, stable coins are fine.
So it's a Bitcoin.
We think they're inherently unstable, but you can use them.
So what's the key observation is Bitcoin isn't the thing that's stable, but it's the amount of dollars that you could redeem the Bitcoin that you have after you have one of these hash rate downside, shorts open. That's kind of like very wide. It's like, okay, like I'm going to lose up to, let's say you do 50% hash rate down, and you think that there's a linear correlation between hash rate and price. You're like, okay, if it goes down 50%, give me twice as much Bitcoin as I have. Mm-hmm. And if you enter that kind of contract, you're going to be losing a little bit of overhead for premiums to buy them. But on the other hand, if it does slip that much, you will now have a lot more Bitcoin.
Yeah, you're made whole.
So it kind of keeps you within a band, which is cool. That's like a Bitcoin savings contract.
Yeah, it's cool, but it has me thinking, like, what happens in a world where like Bitcoin is the unit of account, people aren't denominating their savings in.
So this is still useful. Like it would just be like if you're long,
you would unwind that contract.
If you're long volatility, you would want these contracts. So you would say, I'm long volatility. I think that Bitcoin's going to just have one of these big swings, and then it's going to pop back up. Mm-hmm. And it's a unit of account, but it still has purchasing power. Yeah. Right. So, even the dollar, even though it's the unit of account for the world, like things change prices. Yeah. So it's not going to fundamentally change, but you would still be, if you're like, hey, one Bitcoin is one Bitcoin, and then this to you looks like a trade of like, okay, if the hash rate goes down, I just get all this Bitcoin. Yeah. And you're not really worried about if it's preserving your stability because you think Bitcoin's already stable. It's just like, I am willing to pay a little bit on this bet that Bitcoin goes down this much, or Bitcoin goes up, more than you expected. Those kind of things.
Yeah, it's fascinating. You can do this all on chain too.
All on chain.
Is it DeFi?
It is. It's. I've told some people who are like very into DeFi. I'm like, so I'm working on something DeFi, and they get really excited, and I tell them like what it is, and they're like, that's not DeFi. I'm like, what is DeFi? What is this decentralized finance? They're like, well, we have like. This protocol. I'm like, okay, well, where's the oracle? And they're like, we have this one oracle for price, but it's like this decentralized, it's like, okay, well, in this, the only thing is Bitcoin.
It's crazy.
It's just Bitcoin. There's no external third, get rid of all that. This is just Bitcoin observing its own financial health and then trading contracts based on that health, which is kind of mind blowing.
It's crazy. I feel like it should be talked about more.
I'm working on it. I'm trying to figure out if there's a way to drive it forward, but it's kind of a difficult thing to make certain kinds of progress on.
You've made my Friday morning easy. I know what I'm going to write about already, because this definitely does need more attention. And that's the thing. That's the thing that blows my mind. There's a lot of noise in Bitcoin and the overarching cryptocurrency space, and DeFi being one of the loudest noises in the space right now. And stuff like this is very it's tangible, and it actually seems like something that I would use in the future instead of.
Yeah, one of the things I think that's sort of the case for DeFi is you are building crap on top of crap. That's kind of like the general structure, where it's like we have this DeFi thing and we're able to trade all these tokens in this like liquid market and Ethereum or whatever. And it's like, that's cool, right? So maybe that's okay. But what are the tokens that you're trading? They're things no one cares about necessarily. And so just by virtue of what you built it on top of, like as soon as you have an asset that somebody actually cares about, then it will be interesting. But until then, it's kind of crap on top of crap. With this, it's Bitcoin, which people actually care about. And so it's kind of cool because like, okay, like now we have something to trade Bitcoin in these, complicated derivatives contracts. And I think that maybe is sort of like a meaningful use case. I also think the set of people who are hardcore Bitcoiners and the set of people who are into DeFi right now are like very separate sets. Like maybe like Udi reads a lot about DeFi, but not too many other people. But this is like a concrete benefit for a lot of long-term Bitcoin holders that they can buy these contracts that will give them some downside protection. That's like a pretty compelling use case.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just a simple podcaster, hodler who just wants sound money and more importantly, money that I control. And all the DeFi stuff, like it seems cool, but it's like, who is really going to use that? Like,
yeah, but I am worried, like, okay, maybe you can build these contracts and then the market doesn't show up because it's easier to trade them on CME.
That's possible.
And that's a real possibility. For a lot of people, you don't need this decentralized aspect. So it's possible that people don't want this, but I think it's important if Bitcoin is going to achieve its dreams and truly soar that, hey, we actually have left the existing system behind. So that's a little bit of why I like POWSWAP.
Yeah, because again, actually closing the loop, right? Like, why would you want to expose yourself to the CME and that when you can just do it on chain?
Well, there are a lot of reasons.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm always happy to be the devil's advocate against my work.
Okay.
Sort of a Scout's honor or whatever. Part of it is that these centralized exchanges work really well, right? You put in an order, it gets filled. You have market makers, you have fairness, you have regulations. You know that people are not allowed to be market making and also mining, like they have like checks and balances, these kind of things to make sure that there's not like weird market manipulations. In a true DeFi context, that regulatory side doesn't exist. And so a lot of people think that there's maybe like more safety in that. And so that's I think why people might prefer to work with a centralized exchange rather than a decentralized one.
But wouldn't the safety wouldn't that be more regulating, like the actual, like the stuff in meat space, right? Like you can't really regulate.
Well,
is if it's two consenting adults and entering in a contract on chain. Like,
so that's a nice, like story, right? But it turns out that doesn't really matter where the contract is. It just matters, like that the contract was written and the regulators like have, their finger in that pie. So So for regulation, like the regulations will apply regardless. It'll just be that like they're not like necessarily enforceable. And if they're not enforceable and people are cheating, you'll feel safer trading on the centralized exchange because they'll do things like there's no actual Bitcoin in these contracts. They're all cash settled. And so like, okay, you just get $1 payout when this contract strikes in your favor. And people aren't worried about whatever random stuff happening. They're just like, okay, I get my dollars. And then if it comes out that like one miner shut their miners off in order to fraudulently manipulate the market, then the CFTC maybe rolls in and said, no, this is like the underlying commodities market was fraudulent. We're going to roll back the trades for the last day.
Yeah.
And maybe that's what happens. I don't know the exact particulars of how that would shake out between the CFTC and SEC if you have a fraudulent underlying market. But you would have those protections because they're cash settled. Here, you wouldn't have that protection. If a miner is like, you know what, I'm going to shut off my miners and I'm going to collect all these, like all this money. That's possible. This is actually a good thing though. And that's what's most interesting. And do you want to know why it's a good thing?
Of course I do.
What does the derivative do fundamentally?
Hedge?
No, like think about for a commodities derivative.
Reacts,
what does it do to the commodity?
It reacts to, what does the derivative...
Yeah, like why do we tolerate these stupid, like derivatives trading, like crazy marketplaces? Like what are they trying to accomplish for a society? Like why do we think this is like a good thing worth spending any time on?
Reduce risk, increase confidence and certainty.
Reduce risk, increase confidence, stabilize supply.
Okay.
Right? So this is a key thing. If you have all these derivatives and financialization of the base layer, you stabilize block production. So boom, right? Right now, we think blocks come every 10 minutes, right? But if the hash rate goes up or down, that changes. With financialization, people may actually keep some latent hash power in order to stabilize the chain if hash rate drops off. So that's actually the result, is that if you believe in derivatives as like an instrument that has social value, then Bitcoin would be more reliable as blocks would show up,
At 10 minutes.
You can't guarantee
Yeah.
that because, hey, that's not how Poisson processes work.
Yeah.
But the moves would be less dramatic.
Yeah.
You would not see moves in the underlying as much because people would have incentive to smooth out that movement, which could be a good thing for society. Like, hey, a lot of new hash rates going on, so we're going to take off our older hash rate to keep that number stable so that we know how our contracts execute. Because at equilibrium, derivatives should keep the prices more stable.
Yeah, I mean that's one thing like the halving always drives home is like 2 years ago the halving was supposed to be on like Memorial Day of this year, but now
And no one knows what's going to happen to difficulty.
Right.
But if you financialize the production of blocks around the halving, you will say yes, people have bet a lot of money that blocks will continue to be produced.
Yeah.
And that should be the thing that happens, and maybe miners are bought into that, and that kind of is a coordinating function for keeping the chain stable.
Yeah. So there was a difficulty adjustment 2 nights ago. I was checking. The blocks are coming in about like 9 minutes and 10 seconds.
Okay.
Right now they're coming in at 9:22. But yeah, like I say it all the time. Every 10 minutes there's a block. But really, up to this point, it's been pacing ahead of that.
Yeah, well, that's actually one of the things that people don't realize is that Bitcoin targets 10 minutes, which means that blocks should always come in if hash rate's growing faster than 10 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because hash rate grows, it comes in a little bit less every time.
Yeah, it's so much to take into consideration when approaching Bitcoin. And again, going back to the fact that you're jumping around the code base and working on all these different areas blows my mind. Like I can barely try to articulate what Bitcoin is and the different parts of it, let alone make the code that makes it work.
Well, imagine how much my head is spinning.
Like, how do you take a break? How do you clear your mind and stay sane?
So I have a dog. That is a pretty important part of my life. Like make sure that I get outside, get some fresh air every day. I think I cook most of my meals. It's sort of like building these like healthy habits that I think are like almost self-regulating, where if you set yourself up in an environment where you kind of have these obligations to do things that are good, you kind of balance out your life. And then when you're focusing on your work, one thing that's important to me is that I have a laptop for traveling, but I work at a desktop. It's building that stability in so that when you have so much hectic going on elsewhere, you can lean on that as your routine.
I love that advice. Routine is important.
Yeah.
What's your dog's name?
Asher.
Asher.
Yeah.
How old is he?
2.5 years.
2.5 years.
Yeah, so I've had him for most of that time.
What kind of dog is he?
Australian cattle dog.
Ah.
Yeah, he's a mix.
Hyper?
I got it from the shelter. He's hyper. He's a very, he's a kind of like those dogs are just like really smart and like they have a lot of stuff going on and they're kind of like watching everything and herding and I don't know. I'm very happy. It's like I would say good things in my life like Asher ranks above Bitcoin. But
wow, that's true love.
yeah.
I know. I hope to meet Asher.
Only dog owners will understand.
Well,
Do you have a
unfortunately,
dog?
no, not in this apartment. We're not allowed. But I think in our next place we're gonna get one.
Nice.
I am the dog person. I like
What kind
dogs.
will you get?
I want a lab, all-American chocolate lab. My wife would like an English bulldog though. She likes but I think that's torture. I think that's cruel.
Yeah, they have some intense breathing problems.
Yeah. And it's like I want a dog I can take for a walk too, like a long walk.
Yeah.
Bulldogs.
My rule of thumb is you kind of have to be able to like wrestle the dog. And it's like, okay.
Yeah, my parents have an Orwellian bear dog. Not Orwellian. I'm kidding. They have it's like a bear dog. I forget the first name of it, but he's Dublin. He's
That must be a gigantic dog.
It's actually he's probably like 60 pounds.
Okay,
70 pounds.
I'm thinking a bear dog. Like
Yeah,
a wolfhound is big.
No, so he's like a shepherd dog.
Okay.
He herds bears
Gotcha.
or scares them away from farmers in bear country, if you will, around the world. And that was Dog Talk on Tales from the Crypt.
Yeah. You can talk about Dogecoin.
Doge. What is Jackson Palmer up to these days? He completely left the space, it seems.
I don't know.
Yeah, I haven't been following. I don't know. I think
I think he works at like Lyft or something like that.
Interesting. Hated his own creation. The man who created Dogecoin. That's what we're asking about. Doge is still around. It's all still around. What do you think going forward? Do you think we have
Maybe I should get CTV merged in Dogecoin.
To prove
Yeah.
is that the Lightning to Bitcoin Gold is actually Dogecoin, not Litecoin, or the silver to Bitcoin's gold.
I have no idea.
Kidding. What are your thoughts on the? Do you think we'll see explosion of alts like we did in 2013, ICOs like we do in 2017 going forward? Do you think the market's learning, consolidating?
So I have a little bit of like a take that not everyone agrees with. More coins are great. More money, more whatever, like issue whatever you want. Like I said earlier, be your own bank, right? Banks can issue, bank issued currencies. In America, they're maybe illegal, but in other countries, banks have their own, reserve notes or whatever. So if you actually want to have your own like financially independent group, like, yeah, it's fine if you issue your own currency. I think that looks different than a lot of what the ICOs are doing. There's a lot of sort of like fraudulent promise on like what it means to be an ICO. Like, oh, there's this decentralized ecosystem that emerges that you're going to be able to use these digital goods. And it's like, okay, well, hold on a second. But just the idea of like, hey, we are this nationality and we're trying to establish our own country and we are going to outsource our currency operation to like, Bitcoin or something like that. And we're going to use this as our monetary platform. That's actually kind of a powerful idea. And I think that I'm like perfectly okay if that's what's going on. And think that like we should hope to see more of that because that means that more people are getting fundamental freedom through Bitcoin. But when it's like, hey, we're a centralized group of developers issuing something to like make a big profit, that's like a different.
Yeah. Yeah, at the end of the day, at least the people that are in it for money too, they usually trickle towards Bitcoin. Again, the network effects take over. Do you think this is, given the amount of energy and infrastructure needed to make these networks run, like do you think this is winner take most all at the end of the day?
No. So I think if you talk to like some hardcore Bitcoiners, what you'll find is that they spend a lot of money on their credit cards because if you spend on your credit card, you get to hold your Bitcoin for longer. And that's sort of like a fundamental thing is that the money that you're using to spend is generally credit because it's cheaper,
Okay.
right? And spend the bad money first, kind of, right? So if you're holding Bitcoin, you think it's going up.
Well, this is in a world in which good money doesn't exist, right? Or
Credit will still exist.
yeah. Oh, I agree with that.
So you still need loans, you still need all this stuff. So credit is still going to exist.
I agree with that.
And so if you have credit, spend on your credit and hold on to your assets. And I think that that's also where, maybe like other coins can exist and fulfill a need is like, if I issue for my organization our own currency, it's sort of like a line of credit for our company that's like traceable. Like how many of your own coin have you issued? And then are you able to like buy them back at like what's the price that you're buying them back at? What's the price that anybody's buying them at? Having that market allows people to like issue credit sort of. So I wouldn't exactly say that here's like a specification for how you issue credit on a chain by issuing tokens. But I think that there's kind of like a mirror where those things look kind of the same.
Yeah. I mean, I like what Hal said, right, with the banks, right? Like you have like a quasi 18th, 19th century Canadian banking system when they had a free banking system where I think people can get Bitcoin reserves and then build what you were describing earlier.
Yeah.
On top of that, using combination of proof of reserve and other stuff to create credit lines for people.
Yeah,
With that being said, like I don't have a lot of credit. I try to live like within my means and pay that. So like in that future too.
Well, paying it down is fine.
Yeah.
Right. It's just that like you get that extra month of exposure.
Yeah.
So I'm not advocating that anybody like don't pay off your credit card.
Yes.
Absolutely pay it off because those interest rates you're probably not going to beat with Bitcoin. But at least month to month, like hold on to your Bitcoin, get the upward movement of Bitcoin because you're trying to if the Bitcoin goes up, let's say 20% this year, it's going to happen most likely in the middle of one of those months and not on the day of your billing cycle or whatever. And so if you're constantly selling Bitcoin to make all these transactions, you're going to miss the day that it goes up, right? On most of your Bitcoin. But if you wait for that month of spending, like you'll get that appreciation for most of your, and this is not financial advice.
No, this is not financial.
It's just sort of like like if you had this fundamental belief that Bitcoin was going to go up a lot or stay about the same, it's better for you to hold on. If you think Bitcoin is really volatile and about neutral, then you wouldn't really care.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, like I'm either going to gain or I'm going to lose, like whatever. But if you think that Bitcoin has an upward direction, then it makes sense to kind of play this game of like waiting to sell your Bitcoin to pay your credit card.
Yeah. The speculative attack.
Yeah. It's leverage.
Yeah.
Right. That's fundamentally it's just leverage, holding on to a larger Bitcoin position than you can afford.
Yeah.
That's what's happening.
It's not what we advise here. We're not giving out advice here. Okay. We're just talking. We're talking about ideas. We're walking through some thought experiments.
I definitely know people who have gotten do leverage by cash advances on their credit card, which is an awful idea.
An awful idea. Terrible idea.
Not me, but
to not get payday loans
Yeah.
to buy Bitcoin. That's
you can't stop people from shooting themselves in the foot.
no. You have to learn. We all learned. Some faster than others. Jeremy, you have to meet up with your family. I don't want to take up too much of your time.
Thank you.
I
Thanks for having me on. It's been awesome.
I really appreciate it. I really hope this isn't the only time. This is the first time.
First of many, I'm sure.
I am too. Where can we find you? Where can we help you?
You can find me at Jeremy Rubin on Twitter. You can send me a message, shoot me a DM. And normally I'm in San Francisco at the Bitcoin devs meetups or whatever. If you're a Bitcoin contributor, happy to chat there. Come to the workshop if you're in the city.
Bang, bang. Jeremy, thank you for all that you do. Thank you for your time. Peace and love, freaks.